before I hand it over to the to our esteemed moderator today, I just want to say a couple of quick words of thanks, particularly to our programming committee that was so important in selecting the presentations for the symposium. Dr. Javier Claver, Dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. Dr. Laura Lopez, who's actually our moderator today, Assistant Professor of English, also for CHAS. Dr. Leticia Vargas, who was one of our moderators yesterday with the UIW School of Osteopathic Medicine. Dr. Alicia Rubio, who will be with us a little bit later today, who's undergraduate director and professor of finance for the HEB School of Business and Administration. Dr. Gabriel Saxton Ruiz, who will also be a moderator later today, professor of Spanish for CHAS. And then my partner in crime for this symposium, the great Mr. Teófilo Reyes, Assistant Director of Leadership and Global Engagement for the Etling Center for Civic Leadership and Sustainability, and also my bodyguard, my personal bodyguard. And want to thank all of you for attending here today and virtually. We also have our Mexico campuses connecting. So happy to have our Mexico campuses always for all of our events that we stream through the Lewis Center. And, you know, just a quick interesting note that, you know, Hispanic heritage, it may be counterintuitive, but, you know, it's celebrating Hispanic heritage in the shape of a Hispanic Heritage Month is really very much a USA phenomenon, you know, and so it's just really interesting, I think, for our students in Mexico to kind of learn more about that. And it's also a sense of pride, I think, you know, for our Mexican students to see, okay, like, wow, they're, you know, in the United States celebrating Hispanic heritage as we should, as an important part of our heritage, regardless of our own ethnicity. Hispanic heritage contributes to our USA identity for sure. So without further ado, now that we're settled, I am going to hand it over to our esteemed moderator, Dr. Laura Lopez, to give the formal introductions to the rest of our panelists and presenters. Thank you very much.
Buenas tardes, bienvenidos, welcome everyone. I've already been introduced, and so I have the pleasure of moderating this panel. I would have liked to have been in person, but this presentation is going to be a hybrid one with some moderation, and my presentation will be online to accommodate that I could not attend in person today. And this panel is on celebrating our Hispanic Latinx heritage through the curriculum. And you see there displayed the various topics that we're going to cover. They're all exciting. And before we start, I want to thank Dr. Rafael Hoyle for dedicating his time, energy, and resources to make this event possible across all UIW campuses, and for recognizing that this is an important conversation. These conversations are crucial across a multitude of borders. And so to keep to our schedule, which is very tight, and allow time for discussion afterwards, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Dr. Zazie Reyes Garcia is an associate professor of communication arts at the University of the Incarnate Word. Her research focuses on the intersection of Latino-Latina communication studies, women's and gender studies, and media and popular culture. Her most recent publications explore podcasting and Latinidad, as well as intergenerational representations of sexuality and gender in shows like Jane the Virgin and One Day at a Time. Dr. Reyes will be presenting alongside 3 ABM communication art students, Madison Campbell, Janelle De Jesus, and Eileen Munoz.
Buenos días, no, buenas tardes, ¿cómo están? Gracias. There we go. Okay. So today I am here to talk about this seminar that I teach at the graduate level. So we have students from our master's program in communication arts, and also students from our ABM program, which is the accelerated bachelor's to masters. The 3 students that are here with me are in that ABM program. This is a seminar that is taught every 3 semesters. So I taught it last semester, and it will be taught again next fall. Let me see.
And Stephanie, just so you know, there are.
Thank you. Yes, I'm not looking back. Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to start just with a quick overview with some of the themes that we cover in the seminar, right? We look at issues like labels. Like we've heard, this symposium is called Hispanic Heritage, but we talk about the word Latina, Latino, Latinx, Latine. So all of these different labels for this one identity. We talk about issues related to language, pop culture, media. I'm mostly a media scholar, so a lot of things that I talk about are media related. And these themes can vary according to the semester, but this would be like the ones that we used last semester, and they remain pretty much similar, right? So one of the first things that I like to do with the seminar is find examples that connect students to the local context. So for instance, the first session, we opened with a podcast about a group of basketball players from Brackenridge High School who in the 1940s faced discrimination and issues of assimilation. And I find that that is a really great piece to get students to start talking about issues that they might have faced as well growing up here. I know that Janelle de Jesus, for example, is going to talk a little bit about issues of language. Other local issues or events like the Chili Queens in San Antonio, again, to talk about celebrating the local food culture, but also to talk about the harassment and discrimination that these women faced. So I try to find examples of, again, things that have happened in San Antonio that help students connect with the topics that we're discussing in class. In the class, we have different readings every week. We've been working with Gloria and Saldua for the last few times that I've taught it. Students really either love her or hate her. She elicits really strong reactions from students, but I find her really helpful to, again, start some conversations. And we also incorporate several contemporary articles written by mostly communication Latino scholars. So for example, this last semester, we talked about representations of Latino voters across media. The class also uses different type of media as a way to reach students. So we read journal articles based on academic research, but we also listen to podcasts, we watch films. So the idea is, again, that I can reach students through different ways, not just through reading. And these are some of the podcasts that we listen to in the semester. Anything for Selena that talks about issues of identity and culture, talk about Bad Bunny and Puerto Rican culture and gentrification. So these are some examples of the different media that we use in class. And then students also lead presentations on the different readings that we have. So each one of our students has to pick one article to present on. And so I find that this gives the students the opportunity to sort of own the material, right? And also to make connections to their own examples of either experiences or media that they might have experienced. So everybody gets the opportunity to lead one of these class presentations, right? And then lastly, we have final projects, and students can choose between writing an academic research paper, and the topic is open to whatever they want. So whatever issue they found more compelling, they can address that, or they can create a media product, right? So last semester, I had two students work on a podcast together about the gentrification of Mexico City, with more and more digital nomads moving to the area. I had students talk about movies like West Side Story and In the Heights, right, to talk about how Latinidad is represented in those films. I had a student do a really great video about the history of immigration from Latin America to the US. So students get a chance to engage creatively with issues that they, again, find compelling, or they can do a deep dive analysis if they choose to do a research paper. And then I've asked 3 of my most brilliant students to come here and share with you their perspectives on the class. So I asked each one of them to highlight one issue that they enjoyed working with. So first, Madison Campbell is going to talk to you about issues of identity.
Hi, everyone. So yes, as Professor has said, I am going to be talking about identity today, and not just about identity, but about labels, race, and identity as well. So my name is Lauren Madison Campbell, and while I'm proud of my name, and I stand here before you proud to say it, when others hear it, they assume I'm not Latina or I'm not Latina enough. I am a proud mestiza woman who is not only Mexican American, but who is also Scottish and Filipino American. I may stand here before you proud and confident, but that is not how I felt growing up in the schools that I went to. Because of my name and how I didn't look like society claimed as Latina, I never felt enough. My grandparents did not teach their children Spanish or of much of our culture out of fear of safety and sense of belonging. This resulted in a whole generation, including my mother and her siblings, of what people now call them no sabo kids. No sabo means doesn't know. And it was thrown at me, and it still is thrown at me as an insult every day. When I was growing up, my mom wished for me to be more connected within our culture and our language and our identity as well. And so she placed me in Spanish immersion classes for my primary and secondary education. I am now a new generation of children who are trying to reconnect with their roots, as probably many of my friends and people in this room can relate, because their grandparents were punished for it. This course at UIW highlights not only the amazing parts of the Hispanic heritage has to offer, but it also addresses harder topics like racism in and out of our culture, the feeling of belonging, and why so many people struggle with it, and how your name and your skin color do not define how Latino you are. While this course isn't specifically a history class, the lessons do touch on important historical events that have shaped the way the world now sees the Latin community. An example of a really important historical event that we cover is Los Conquistadores and how they affected not only Mexico, but the Philippines and many other countries as well, thus creating many multicultural families like mine, as well as how Latinos originated from Europe and how learning how they began to migrate elsewhere, creating even more Latino ethnic groups. And it truly it's brought me closer with other friends of other heritages who, one of my friends, she is from Haiti, and I found out that we are related and somewhere down the line. And so now I call her my cousin, and it's just gonna stay that way. We also have lessons that cover Latin identity within the media, as my professor was saying, and why there was and sometimes still is a lack of accurate representation of our communities. Something I'll remember from this lesson specifically forever of identity was how Dr. Reyes had us watch America Ferrera's TED Talk called My Identity is My Superpower. In it, she discusses her own struggles with her own Latina identity. And while attempting to achieve her dreams as an actress, she was told she was never Latina enough for the media, or she was typecasted in roles that were toxic stereotypes of Latina women. My whole life, I had been struggling with my own identity and confidence with my own Latina self-sense. However, after taking this course at UIW and being involved within our community and being welcomed by our amazing professors and classmates, I have never felt more accepted and educated within my culture and the people I get to share it with here. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Janelle De Jesus. I'll be graduating in the spring with my master's degree, which is crazy to think about because I didn't speak a lick of English until I was about 8 years old. I come from an immigrant household. So my mom is born and raised in Mexico, did not come over here until she was about 16. And so I never got to experience what English was like until we moved to a little town called Castroville, Texas, which if you've ever been is nothing but cows and corn and nobody that looks like me. So I grew up with step siblings who were white. I grew up with a stepdad who was white, and I grew up with a lot of people that were just white. Not only that, but I was placed in what I was told was going to be a Spanish speaking class that were for students who didn't speak English. I took 8 different attempts to try and test out of these classes in my 3 years in that elementary school, and every single time was denied because I was too dumb, as my peers would say. I learned very quickly that even though I was excelling in all of these courses from English, math, social studies, and language arts and sciences, that I was never going to properly fit in. I tried again in middle school to get out of these classes and learned very quickly that it was just a class for other Mexicans like me under the label of learning disabilities, which meant brown and Spanish speaking, which I learned very, very quickly was not the place for me. I was in elementary school in 2010, so that was 14 years ago, and I was still experiencing pretty segregated communities, which was really, really crazy. I did eventually get to break this cycle when I got to high school. I was allowed to take the honors courses. I was speaking fluent English by then, and I graduated the top of my class and got into a pretty good university, I would say. But it really wasn't until I got to UIW that I started to really feel truly at home. So classes with Dr. Z, everyone, if you ask anybody, they'll tell you that she's my favorite professor because I feel very heard in her classes. And I learned very quickly what it feels like to be in a community that is open and accepts you for who you are and what you can be. It's really crazy to be standing here. Obviously, in a communication arts journalism, it's a very English heavy degree. So that's crazy to think about. Unfortunately, I did lose my Spanish in the process. It's not really something I speak anymore. I have a really hard time talking to my grandparents, my tios and my tias and everything, but I'm slowly getting back into it. I made the commitment that when I started school here, I would promise myself to actually learn the language and everything. So I'm very, very happy about that. I will say that the Latino studies class really did open my eyes to how crazy segregation is in a Latino community because I never realized how insanely separated San Antonio could actually be. Castroville is 30 miles west of here, so that's not very far. It's a 30-minute drive, and it is a completely different world out there than it is here. We did talk a lot about different research, different podcasts that covered this. We talked about like Selena Quintanilla and how she didn't really speak Spanish, but was still loved and adored. And it was just really, really crazy to see different people like me who were celebrities struggling in the same way or other students struggling in the same way. So it was really nice to just be heard and be open. I encourage every single student at some point to either attend a lecture like this or take a class because it's really a different experience when you're actually immersed in a lesson where you get to learn a little bit more than just your own story and you get to listen to everybody else's. I turn it over to Aileen. Thank you guys for being here today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eileen. I will be one of the students graduating this semester. I grew up in a Mexican household, and I was raised hearing many different stories and fairy tales that made me fall in love with the strange and the magical. As a child, creatures especially enthralled me. From fairies to El Cucuy, I believed in them all. But as an adult, I never really thought twice about them. So one of the most fascinating discussions we had in class was on Latinx monsters and the impact they have in the cultures they are created in, as well as adopted by. Because of this class, I was able to listen once more to these stories and creatures that once colored my childhood, and I gained a whole new understanding about them. Through the podcast and some articles and discussions, we learned that monsters, or the concept of monsters, has always been used as a tool for othering, for oppression, and also as a social metaphor. These stories not only served as moral lessons on right and wrong or societal expectations, but they had unique correlations to the time and locations that they existed in or they appeared in. The political and ethical origins were especially surprising to learn. For example, like the connection between zombies and capitalist consumerism, and how the undead are represented differently between Latinx and Western films, or how La Llorona's voice was reclaimed from the conquest colonial era to a warning of danger, or even a declaration of protection for women and children, and how El Chupacabra's presence actually marked instances of unstable political change and extreme poverty, where people's resources were being bled dry unjustly. One of our readings was on William Galco Quiros, in which he writes the following in his paper, Líbranos de todo mal, but deliver us from evil. For communities of color, the imaginary is about the real, as the real transforms how they envision their futures. Monsters denounce violence, but they are also tools to defeat the oppressor and ultimately to combat or negotiate violence. I believe that these monster stories hold a significance in the meaning of their creation and what they can reveal about their cultures and communities. These monster stories and a lot of our readings and a lot of the experiences we discussed in class carry markers of spirituality, politics, and values that highlight the cultures that they exist in. And I think that these, like the class, help educate about the past as much as they serve as a tool of reflection for the future. So in that practice, as I left this class, I left with a much broader perspective of my own culture. Thank you.
You've heard the students. I'm going the wrong way. There. You've heard the students, and we'll take your questions afterwards. Thank you. I'm going to introduce our next speakers. So let me grab my glasses. Dr. Tara Hemberg is an associate professor of rhetoric and composition at the University of the Incarnate Word. She's interested in researching how to assist students in experiencing belonging in the writing classroom. She is presenting with Evan Santos, an MBA student at UIW. Evan has developed a strong passion for research and enjoys exploring how student identity and grit shape their learning experiences. Evan's background includes supporting research projects and working closely with faculty at UIW, which has prepared them well for this role. So welcome our next speakers. Thank you.
Talking about discussing considering the benefits of controversial classroom discussions for Hispanic students. And we want to talk about how to help faculty help their Hispanic students feel a sense of belonging in the writing classroom, especially during a post-pandemic time. For students communicating about controversial topics within a writing classroom that's discussion-based is one method that supports them in feeling more engaged. Okay. With the classroom, such conversations can feel difficult. And outside their classroom on the campus, it might feel volatile and dangerous. Okay. Post-pandemic and pandemic have affected students' resources, stress factors, and campus fitness and safety, especially for Hispanic students. And so with this, we're connected to the idea of creating belonging in a classroom to help students with their persistence, with immatriculation rates. And this study presents the findings about this. So this is our literature review. According to Gloria Anzaldúa, the borderlands represent sites of crisis where forces are shaped by intermixing cultures, races, ethnicity, languages are colliding in chaos, interwarfare, transition, hybridity, and disaster. We have indigenous and mixed background residents who experience a sense of tyranny, violence, shock, exploitation, and closure with their ability to juggle more than one viewpoint simultaneously. Such feelings of schism and non-belonging can affect students even at majority Hispanic universities, where students, both advantages and disadvantages, feeling disconnected or not and then perhaps not continuing and succeeding. So for our empirical study, we assessed a population of Hispanic students from UIW, their personality traits and identity, their class participation and style, perceived levels of belonging and fit, especially during the post-pandemic period. It's a stressful time. As they talked about a range of political issues in their writing assignments for a lower level writing class. So some of the political issues that we discussed included the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, Hispanic Latinx border culture, multilingual identities, religious and spiritual faith, intergenerational relationships, reproductive issues, technology and career paths, drug, cartel and trafficking networks, and the ideas of the American dream. Okay, so drawing on this result, we're calling upon faculty to discuss pedagogical best practices in writing or literature classrooms involving establishing belonging and fit and interacting with marginalized students, upholding discussions of their borderlands as limitable, powerful places, and generating dialogues and assignments supporting them and covering difficult political topics. Okay, so it's a mixed method study utilizing an exploratory case study design, convergent parallel strategy with survey and short answer questions. We have a diverse sample enrolled in this literature class, and here are some of the scales that we use. Okay, students consisted primarily of they were undergraduates, they were younger, and from different departments and backgrounds, diverse socioeconomically. 25 participants between the ages of 18 to 21. 44% were conservative politically, 24% liberal, 20% middle of the road, 4% libertarian. Okay.
These are some of the classroom practices that Dr. Hambro gave the students. Students were informed that they never had to write about anything that was traumatic or stressful. Here's some topics that they wrote about. One was a time in which they felt they did not belong or not accepted. Another was one or more goals for your life. Will it or any of them be difficult to achieve? Would your family or friends find your goals to be unusual? Criticize them or try to persuade you to change them. Another was discuss a family member who has had both a positive and negative effect on you or has been a difficult person to deal with. Write about a time that you or someone you know was in a difficult relationship. What was the result? And describe the situation. Write about a time that you had to make an important decision. What was the result? Write about a time that you felt others stereotyped you. Describe it. What was the result? And lastly is write about a time that you had faith in something or believed in something outside of yourself. What was this experience? What was the result? And here's some practices we followed to create student belonging in the classroom. The first one being shine a light on each student. When working with students who have learning differences, it's important to model that every student has something special about them for him or her to celebrate. 2 is foster student identity building. Students are empowered by their interests and passions, and they regularly say that they enjoy learning about themselves and each other. 3 is encourage students to share their experiences. Create opportunities for students to share their experiences, their past perspectives through class discussions, writing assignments, or even group projects. Celebrate diversity. Build a sense of belonging by prompting understanding and respect for differences. Encourage students to learn about and appreciate different cultures, backgrounds, and different experiences. And lastly is foster positive peer relationships. Offer opportunities for students to get to know each other, provide positive conversation starters to help students strike up a conversation about themselves and speak respectively.
Are some of the questions that we asked in the survey. This first slide deals with the students' ability to share their opinions and to confront disapproval. So we asked them before taking English 2310, could you share your opinions in other university classes with the reading and writing component, even if you thought that your professors might disapprove? And when students completed this response at the beginning of the semester, The mean score was 3.25, and by the end, they reported a mean score of 412, which was statistically significant. And so their ability to talk about their opinions increased, even if they thought their professors might disapprove. Another question we asked was, before the class, could you share your opinions in a university class with a reading and writing component, even if you thought your classmates might disapprove? And when students completed this response at the beginning, the mean score was 3.36. And by the end, it rose. They were able to talk about their opinions, even if they worried about classmates, to a score of 4.08, which was a statistically significant increase. We also asked them about their level of boredom in reading and talking about different political ideas. And we asked, before taking English 2310, were you bored or did you lose interest when a discussion got highly theoretical or abstract in university classes with the reading and writing component versus afterwards? And at the beginning, their score was 3.36. And by the end, it had gone down, which means they were less bored or had greater interest, to a score of 2.04, which was statistically a significant decrease. We also were looking at if their empathy would increase in talking about political ideas with classmates. We asked them, before taking English 2310, did you find it easy to empathize with a classmate whose experiences were very different from yours in other university classes with the reading and writing component versus afterwards? And students at the beginning had a score of 3.67. By the end, they reported a mean score of 4.46, which was a statistically significant increase, that they were more empathetic afterwards toward classmates.
Quotes from students concerning identity and belonging. The first quote being, growing up in South Texas in a small town outside of San Antonio, I was the only Hispanic Asian in the community. I look back in my past experiences and realize that there were so many microaggressions, instances of racism and cultural identity suppressions I allowed because I wanted to fit in. The second being, a time that comes to mind when I felt like I did not belong in my setting was when I was in high school. It was part of the school's dance team. It was very challenging trying to fit in with the team, as most of them had already established friendships with the other girls. That made me feel like an outsider, as they already had more memories on the team with each other, and I could not relate. Here's some quotes concerning COVID-19. One student said, I remember when COVID came, I was a sophomore in high school, and having to do virtual was the worst. I never learned anything, and so turning in assignments was horrible. Coming back to school after COVID was a hard transition because I had gotten used to my virtual schedule. The second one is, a personal loss for me was quitting tennis in my junior year. I had gotten into varsity in my sophomore year, but the season was quickly cut due to COVID-19. I had been playing tennis since 5th grade and I loved the sport, but once our season was cut, I wasn't able to practice like I used to. Two quotes concerning facing stereotypes was, from that moment onwards, I found myself constantly battling feelings of exclusion in classes, group projects, and social gatherings. The assumptions and stereotypes associated with my sexual orientation haunted me relentlessly. The second one is, as a Mexican American, I often feel judged and stereotyped wherever I go. No matter what the circumstances are, in the mall, restaurants, outings, my own friend groups. The stigmatisms and underlying notions people often have just by the way one looks often cause me to feel discouraged and insecure. These quotes are concerning religion from students. The first one is, religion has always been a hard topic to talk about because my parents' religions are completely different and opposite in many aspects. Picking what type of religion I wanted to follow was hard because knowing that there were many options for me to choose from made me fall into a limbo where I would constantly ask myself if there truly were a God. There is. A time that I had faith and believed in something other than myself was when I got baptized in 2021. Since getting baptized, I feel a greater sense of purpose in life, and I have a strong belief in my religion, which is outside of just myself. Two two quotes concerning gender from students. The first one being a woman in society has always been difficult because of just how many stereotypes we are set into. I can't even think of all the names I had been called just for being born a woman. The other one is, I was with a guy friend and I told him I was going to check my oil level. He laughed at me and told me that he would do it because I was a girl, saying you're too small and too much of a girl to know how to properly check your car. I told him I'd show him that I could handle it myself. So I checked my oil level and added coolant to my car. He saw me do it by myself and I felt proud that I was proving him wrong, because I believed it's ridiculous that he would think that simply because I'm a woman, that I don't know how to work a car or how to fix a simple car-related issue. And lastly, you have quotes about careers. My ultimate goal in my life is to be happy. No matter my job, I don't particularly care what my career is. I want to be content doing it. Don't get me wrong, I want a career that makes money, but that ties in with my happiness. I love the quote here. It says, I don't want my job to consume me. And lastly, it was the worst to go to work every day. Therefore, leaving that server job was the best thing I could have done for myself. As soon as I walked out of the building, I felt a sense of relief. I find it interesting how much a place's atmosphere can depress you. I used to wonder whether it was in my brain, but when I quit that job, things started to feel a lot better.
So our findings suggest that many students desire to bring various identities, lives, and even when their backgrounds and loyalties are good position. So we have some questions that you might want to what strategies have you as faculty apply to students discussing those topics with students and helping them move along? What topics do students find urgent to discuss? I introduce the next speaker. Let me pull this up here. Okay, Dr. Laura Lopez is an assistant professor of English, composition, and literature at the university. Her teaching and scholarship specialize in Latinx literature, especially Latinx young adult literature and contemporary American literature. Her research and publications interrogate the literary representations of social justice, gender and cultural identity formation, and belonging in Latinx young adult literature. She's presenting today with 3 of her students from her culturally inclusive children and young adult literature course taught this spring. UIW alumna Natalia Lopez and UIW majors Julian Saniceros and Mercedes Rodriguez. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara.
Oh, okay, thank you. Can everybody see my PowerPoint fine? Hope. Okay, so the presentation is, as Tara just mentioned, the power of Latinx literature to preserve and transform cultural heritage for Gen Z and beyond. I'm going to read a script from a script just so that I have everything that I want to say in the limited time that we have, and have the students also come up and be able to share. In the early to mid-late 20th century, social pulls from the need to assimilate and what Gloria Anzaldo refers to as linguistic terrorism largely discouraged U.S. Latinx Hispanic Americans from identifying with their culture, language, and history. Dr. Arturo Chavez referred to these experiences in his talk yesterday. Latinx growing up during this time period never saw themselves in movies or television unless the show needed stereotypical, images of the gang member or maid. we never read books with Latinx characters. Growing up during this time, I fit my brown girl self into European or Anglo-American molds, comparing myself to Jo in Little Women, Laura in Little House on the Prairie, Ramona in the Ramona and Beezus series, all the rebellious characters. But sometimes the eldest daughter, Marcia from the Brady Bunch, if I can go into all the multiple also television and films that were there that did not have Latinx. Yet these identifications never seem to explain my place in the world and the courageous efforts it took to grow up, to believe in myself despite disempowering moments from Texas racism or sexism. I was a fourth generation Latina, so understandably I had adapted and found myself in the 90s with the ability to understand Spanish, yet not speak it, and no knowledge of the history of my cultural ancestry that society held me as a representative. So then in the late 80s and 90s, things changed. We had a cultural breakthrough when US Latinas and Latinx writers began to publish fiction and nonfiction narratives documenting their intersectional experiences around culture, gender, class, and sexuality. Sandra Cisneros initially published House on Mango Street in 1984 through a small press, but in 1989, when a large New York publishing house reprinted her book, the mainstream took notice, and schools adopted the book throughout the 90s, using it to represent the Latinx experience. Finally, Latinx youth could identify with the character, the main character, 11-year-old Esperanza. Finally, we had literature that spoke to some of our cultural experiences. But quickly, by the 90s, the early 90s and the 2000s, major changes occurred that sort of introduced certain cultural effects. The World Wide Web, the internet, was born, forever changing everything through today, making culture and cultural exchanges globalized, and quickly dispersing culture among various platforms. People were exposed to many cultures online as never before, which was a good thing, but it also caused interesting cultural effects. For example, BTS, a mega popular Korean pop band in the mid-2010s, caused the Korean language's popularity to explode in countries like the US and Canada, says the BBC in 2018. Korean language courses in US universities rose over 14%, while overall language enrollment was in decline. 200,000 people signed up to learn Korean in Duolingo. Korean history courses rose too. As the BBC notes, the internet has brought the K-pop craze at the time to the most unexpected places. Latinx university students at UT Rio Grande Valley, where I was teaching, were caught up with this craze too. I just remember the K-pop conference that they had when I was there in 2018. And so adding another language is great, but just when we had that breakthrough the decade before, or in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe even a few years before, helping Latinx to connect or reclaim their voices and experiences, the web now attracted young Latinx to other cultural systems. And so now Latinx culture was competing for our youth's attention. So this presentation proposes that children's and young adult literature by and about Latinx writers is an essential vehicle of cultural production for younger generations of Latinx heritage to remain connected to their cultural heritage, and in some cases even reclaim it or even initiate connections to their Latinx cultural heritage, given what I heard in yesterday's presentations. Children's and YA books serve as a unique reading experience for young readers that adult-level books cannot deliver. These texts speak their language, chronicle their social concerns and experiences, subject positions, and perspectives during a period of immense transition, rife with potential, but filled with insecurity. This is when cultural traditions can function as an anchoring role through the transitions, keeping them tethered to home, family, and culture as they work their way to adulthood, which is no easy task. So Latinx young people today have much literature to choose from. The publication of Latinx children's and YA books has grown exponentially in the last few years. I put together this table that shows you statistics from the Cooperative Children's Book Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And according to them, in 2023, children's and YA books about Latinx, Latine, was 9.1% of all children's and YA books published that year. That doesn't sound like a lot, but actually the percentage has doubled since 2016 and quadrupled since 2014. If you look at this, the bold font there. So we're getting closer to the proportion of US Latinx identified persons in our country, which is at 19% as of the 2020 US Census. And therefore, today's youth have access to a literature that their parents and grandparents did not have. Is it any coincidence that diverse books are banned lately or being attacked lately? I think not, right? There's an increase now, which unlike we've ever had before. But now there's also strong, force against trying to take them away, right? So Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed teaches us that more access to literacy, awareness, self-reflection, and consciousness scares elites and upsets power structures. And therefore we see this. So this slide highlights some excellent examples of contemporary US Latinx children and young adult books that I have, most of which I have covered in my classes at UIW. Pam Munoz Ryan's Esperanza Rising made a great impression on many of my students, several of whom are speaking today. The novel is filled with the beauty of Latinx traditions such as Las Mañanitas, the quinceañera tradition, strong abuela and parental figures, Latinx culinary customs, respect of elders, and community solidarity. Although an older children's book around 3rd grade or above, it contains factual-based Latinx historical plot elements, such as the class divisions between privileged Mexican landowners and the working class during the Mexican Revolution, the struggles of the US farm workers pre-Cesar Chavez, and the Bracero deportations that happened in the US in the 50s and 60s. Well, maybe 40s and 50s. And so lots of important things that they would be knowledgeable on after reading this book, which is a children's book. Belinda Acosta's Sister Strangers and Starting Over highlights the quinceañera rite of passage, as well as incorporates themes in the plot around family injustices, the silencing and ostracization of young Latinas who break norms that are expected for girls in our culture, and the cultural injustice of the Ciudad Juarez femicides, and all of that in a book that is a YA book. And thus, these works of literature are vehicles for teaching and normalizing Latinx cultural traditions, language, when their work is bilingual oftentimes, and also history, while raising the awareness of a young person's consciousness through themes of social justice for Latinx people. Elizabeth Acevedo's The Poet X and her other works impart the perspective of a young Afro-Dominicana in New York who is experiencing budding first love while living under a mother who upholds very restrictive Catholic Christian expectations for girls. And the protagonist also has a twin brother who hides his gay identity from the family, whom Chamara, the protagonist, supports coming out so that he's not so depressed as she sees in the novel. These themes are characterized as injustices of young Latinx Gen Zs from being stifled in one's identity through cultural traditions, and thus contemporary Latinx YA can challenge Latinx cultural norms that do not reflect the realities and beliefs of today's youth. Contemporary Latinx writers are problematizing the aspects of cultural scripts that are operating from before the civil rights movement, even feminist movements, the LGBTQ rights movement, Me Too movements, Black Lives Matter, that Gen Zs have come to know through their globalized lenses, thanks to the World Wide Web. Latinx young adult literature offers a unique perspective on cultural traditions, viewing them, sorry, that slide was supposed to be showing. Latinx young adult literature offers a unique perspective on cultural traditions, viewing them from fresh lenses from generations that have experienced more cultural diversity and global viewpoints via the internet and social media than any past generation. So this contemporary lens then includes the acceptance, more so than previous generations, of difference and the multiple ways that Latinx identity can be expressed. And one of the other books that were pictured earlier is Pedro Martin's graphic memoir, Mexikid, which is an extremely humorous memoir about his large family and their trips to back and forth to visit his abuelito in Mexico. And it is filled with many cultural references from both sides of the border, his experience as an American child, but also as a child of Mexicanos who travel back and forth. And it is written for a young audience using a literary form that speaks to them through illustrations and humor. So to conclude my portion of the presentation, I will say that this genre serves many purposes for Latinx youth and for other cultures to learn about life through this lens, through this perspective. And culture will continue to transform. The ability to preserve some of the core aspects of our cultural heritage, however, depends on the continuation of these stories and our access to them. So I want to bring in the perspectives of students now, Gen Zs, right, who have read these books in my courses. And I'm going to go ahead and, if they're not already up there, have our three students come up to the podium. Recent UIW alumna Natalia Lopez will read hers first, followed by UIW English majors Mercedes Rodriguez and Julian Ceniceros. I'm going to stop sharing.
We have we have a microphone here. We also have handheld mics, whatever you like. And we can also move around the furniture however you like. You can also
Good afternoon. My name is Natalia Lopez, but my real Mexican name is Natalia Montserrat Lopez Gomez, because you know what to say about Mexican names being long. But today I'm going to be talking about why Latinx literature is important in both young adult literature and higher academia. As I was drafting this speech in my head at work, a mother and her little girl stopped me. She said to me, "My daughter recognizes you because of your curls. You have the same hair as her." She then told me that her daughter doesn't like to wear her hair down and that she either wanted to wear a ponytail or pigtails. I looked at the little girl, who I could see was happy to see that there were others like her, and said, "Your hair is beautiful because not that many have curls like us." A week later, I saw them again, and there was the same little girl with her bouncy dark curls down below her ears and sitting in a shopping cart. I realized then that if something as simple as an employee's hair texture could have an impact on a child's self-confidence, then books and stories about characters with the same culture or heritage could impact kids by the thousands. I am not alone when I say that my teenage years were very confusing, especially as a girl who was stuck between being a gringa and a real Mexican. If you asked me to name a book I read in middle or high school that had a Mexican character that wasn't a plot device or a side character, I couldn't tell you. It wasn't until I took Dr. Laura Lopez's Children's and Young Adult Literature course where I read Pam Munoz Ryan's Esperanza Rising, a book about the life of a young Mexican girl who was forced to leave her town and move to the United States. I found myself, at 22 years old, reconnecting with parts of myself that I didn't think were still around. I couldn't help but think to myself, where was this book when I needed it most? Had I been introduced to the stories like Esperanza Rising as a kid, I wouldn't have felt so alone. It wouldn't have taken me so long to truly love and appreciate my culture and heritage. When I took a world literature course, I learned that humans inherently look for themselves in everything, especially in the characters we read about. As a Mexican American, getting to finally read Latinx stories as a senior in college was a relief after being assigned so much British and American literature, because up until that point, I could not connect with what I was reading. It's easy to say that representation matters when yours has been designed into a school's curriculum for ages, but it's important that minorities and people of color also receive the same love and respect, because in the end, that's what it's all about, loving yourself and those around you. By dedicating college courses to diverse and inclusive literature in academia, the boundaries of education are pushed. But by including diverse and inclusive literature into courses across multiple disciplines, the term university, whose Latin origin means the universe or the world, is truly honored. Our world and this country will always be diverse. College campuses will always be diverse. Ultimately, Latinx voices in our classrooms are meant to enrich education and provide students with tangible proof that their stories matter too. And by denying those voices to be highlighted and championed in higher education, all students of all backgrounds are at a disservice. I think back to that little girl with the curls because it's not just about inclusion, but empowerment. It's easy to get lost in a world that stops for no one, but with the power of education and inclusive tools to support a wide landscape of backgrounds, we're all main characters of our own stories and deserve to be seen. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mercedes Rodriguez, and last semester I had the privilege of also taking the culturally inclusive children's YA literature course taught by Dr. Lopez. So I initially signed up for the course because it seemed like a fun class to take, like getting to read kids' books and like as a college student, like who wouldn't want to do that? But what I ended up getting out of the semester was so much more than what I thought I would. I was exposed to new types of stories that centered around Latin culture, queer identity, neurodivergent lives, and coming of age stories that were perfectly wrapped up into one insightful semester. So as a Hispanic person who grew up here in San Antonio, I realized how small my world of literature was when I was younger. I was never exposed to the kinds of literature that we were able to study in the course from last semester. And had I been given that opportunity, it would have changed my view of how I saw myself. If I'm being honest, for a long time, I thought that there was an ideal, like, dream life that everyone was expected to live, where we were meant to assimilate into a more white-dominated culture. And as a little girl, I thought that I was supposed to be exactly like the books. I didn't match the cliche. I didn't have the blonde hair and blue eyes. And the first book that we actually read in class was called Fun with Dick and Jane. And I brought it because based on the cover, you can see the cliche, the white-dominated class is the cover. And so we read that book, and it was like it was part of the whole package. Two children, the mother was the homemaker, the father was the breadwinner. And this was not at all a reflection of who I was. And I didn't read this book specifically when I was younger, but I read a lot of books that were like it. So having this that followed the same formula, it was difficult to grow up seeing myself in those books. So I thought that I was meant to follow the correct expectation that I had always had looming over my head, but I felt like I was looking through a window at someone else's life, and I wasn't able to look to a mirror to see myself in these books. But luckily, I was fortunate enough to know that there are stories out there that resemble who I am in my culture, as well as people that I know who have similar identifications. Had I been given these types of reading materials when I was younger, more impressionable, I do wonder if that would have allowed me to become more accepting in my own skin. One of the novels that left me feeling like it's hard to put into words, but it was just such a great novel and it left a huge impact on me that Dr. Lopez and Natalia talked about was Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz Ryan. And I have it here. It was my favorite book I read last semester. For those who might not know, it's about a young girl, Esperanza, who moved from a ranch in Mexico to a labor camp in California. Essentially, she was a fish out of water in a whole new environment, and she lost everything, and the world she knew was turned upside down. But she had to stay strong for her mother and herself. So there was a reason why this novel won many awards and honors, and it was because it leaves the reader with a sense of hope in a world where everyone longs for a happy ending. If you haven't gotten the chance to read the book, then I would highly recommend it because no matter the age you are, there's a piece of you that can be found within the story. The trials and tribulations that Esperanza went through may not be exactly on par for every reader, but the book highlights the strength, resilience, and persistence that it takes to walk through life. The culturally inclusive lit course showed me how these books are being used in school now, and I think that it's great to know that younger students are now more likely to see their own reflection rather than looking from the outside in. If I couldn't have the chance to experience these stories when I was younger, I'm proud to know that young children have the opportunity to see themselves and their families in the stories they're reading now. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julian Siniceros, and I am a senior here at the University of Incarnate Word. I'm an English major, and I was asked to participate in the symposium by Dr. Laura Lopez. I am originally from El Paso, Texas, a border town, and my mother, she immigrated into the country in her early childhood, and all four of my grandparents were immigrants from Mexico. So this is a very special moment for me, so I'm excited to be here. A personal reflection participating in the culturally inclusive children's and YA literature course last semester was a transformative experience for me. I felt both privileged and honored to engage with texts that not only celebrated Latinx culture, but also offered narratives that spoke directly to my own upbringing and experiences as a Hispanic student from El Paso, Texas. The literature we explored, ranging from Sandra Cisneros' The House on Mango Street to Esperanza Rising, served as a powerful testament to the riches of Latinx heritage and its unique place in the canon of American literature. As a student who identifies deeply with the borderland identity, the opportunity to read and analyze texts like Prietita and the Ghost Woman by Gloria Azandula was particularly impactful. This piece, which draws on the legend of La Llorona, a haunting and tragic figure in Mexican folklore, resonated with me on a deeply personal level. Growing up in a border city like El Paso, I was surrounded by stories of La Llorona, many of which were shared around family gatherings. It was these tales passed down through generations that shaped my early understanding of storytelling as a cultural artifact and as a means of preserving heritage. Through these stories, I came to recognize the fluidity and the complexity of the Latinx experience, where the past and present intertwine in ways that defy linear narratives. In Prietita and the Ghost Woman, I saw not only a reflection of my own childhood experiences, but also a broader commentary on the ways in which folklore serves as a vehicle for cultural preservation and identity formation. The inclusion of such narratives in a university course speaks to the critical importance of representation within the academic space. It validates our experiences and affirms that our stories, rooted in struggle, resilience, and beauty, deserve a place within the literary tradition. This, in turn, cultivates a sense of belonging among the Latinx students and fosters a deeper appreciation for our shared cultural heritage. Additionally, being part of a class that centered on Latinx voices felt revolutionary in itself. Too often, the literature that is deemed worthy of academic inquiry is limited to the Eurocentric canon, leaving marginalized voices at the periphery. However, by engaging with authors like Gloria Azandula, Sandra Cisneros, and others, I felt empowered to claim my own place within the academic discourse. These texts not only deepened my appreciation for Latinx literature, but also offered a lens through which to examine my own identity as a borderland student. This course provided a safe and inclusive space for a dialogue where my peers and I can discuss the intricacies of our shared and divergent experiences. The significance of studying Latinx literature in a university setting extends beyond the classroom walls. It contributes to the decolonization of the curriculum by challenging traditional narratives and amplifying voices that have historically been silenced. For me, as a student from a border city, this was particularly meaningful because it allowed me to see my own story reflected in texts we have read. I realized the experiences I once considered too niche or specific to be understood on a broader scale were, in fact, part of a larger tapestry of Latinx narratives that have shaped and continue to shape American cultural and literary landscapes. In conclusion, being exposed to this course and these texts was not merely an academic exercise. It was an act of reclamation and empowerment. It reinforced the value of my own heritage and identity while simultaneously challenging me to consider the broader implications of inclusivity within the academic space. The stories we read, whether they were about overcoming adversity, navigating cultural duality, or preserving folklore, served as reminders that Latinx narratives are not monolithic. Rather, they encompass a diverse range of voices and experiences that deserve to be studied, celebrated, and shared. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natalia, Mercedes, and Julian, for sharing your stories, for having the courage to share those stories. And it brings me joy to hear the voices of our young adults and the importance of this literature as filling a need for them. So we're now going to move to open the floor for questions and comments. And I think my other co-presenters are going to moderate the in-person audience. And so far online, no one has questions, but I will let you know if there are any questions if you don't hear us or see us.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, and actually, it won't be the moderators. It'll be me and Theo. That if anybody has questions, just please raise your hand and or comments, and I will. Here, I'll give you the microphone here, Jasmine.
Hello, my name is Jasmine, and I just want to say thank you for all of the presenters and all of the young people that spoke. I know public speaking in any age is difficult, so thank you so much. I really appreciate the perspectives offered. I really just wanted to say I really appreciate the pieces on, you know, identity and just how culture has just played such a pivotal part in your youth and growing up, and really honing in on how important culture and stories are. And I think the highlight, you know, in, you know, just being an African American woman is to never forget the stories, never forget the impact of the narratives, because those stories carry so much identity. And I think, you know, I think for me, I can definitely relate to you know, feeling as if I have to fit into a certain perspective or narrative, especially with natural hair and curls. Thanks, friend. So, you know, I really appreciate that. And I really hold on to, you know, just preserving the stories. And even though, I have Dominican friends, and that's not a part of my particular story, I can now step into your world and I can step into your space in a very authentic way because I can identify with feeling othered and feeling, you know, like I didn't have a voice, being an African American female, having curls, being expected to look a certain way, speak a certain way, or being judged because, you know, you come from a certain place, but you don't look like the demographic within that space. And so I definitely appreciate just the authenticity offered in the presentation of stories. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do we have
Yes.
another? Thank you very much. Yep, right there.
I just want to say thank you as well for all the presenters and people who spoke. Being a first generation Mexican American or Mexican, my family's from Mexico, so them immigrating here and me being a first generation college student and high school graduate, it was a little bit difficult for me to feel like I belong. Being here at UIW now for my third semester, I'm still like, wow, I'm like still here. But hearing y'all stories and everything like that, you know, growing up not knowing English and having to learn it and then being separated from the other students and not knowing why. It's a little like it gets to you a little bit, but being able to come to a school where you're now like the majority, vice the minority, it feels really good. And I mean, my question, I guess, to the university, and I know to like to the students, because I know there's clubs and things like that for Hispanics and Latinos and everything like that for us to feel even more belonging, and as well as classes. But where can we find like groups like that as far as like being more a part of the community? And
It's a really good question. I just want to give one quick answer to that before, is that we're working on right now, really under the leadership of Dr. Gabriela Saxton Ruiz, with a handout that we'll be sending out to everyone after that register for the symposium. And we'll include not only some of the works of literature that have been referenced here, but also a list of the student clubs. And then we'll have actually one of the panels that we are having as part of the symposium. It's the one, I think I'm not sure if it's the next one or tomorrow, but we'll go through some of the student clubs that allow. So those opportunities are definitely there, but and we're going to give out that handout, and you will receive a copy. Really appreciate you sharing.
All right, real quick, how are you feeling right now? Sleepy, I see. Real quick, we're gonna head into the break. And before we head into this break, I just want to go ahead and let's give a round of applause to our presenters as those that's also shared. Thank you. By a show of hands, how many of you have learned something new within the last 30 minutes? Awesome. By a show of hands, how many of you feel heard in the last 45 minutes? Confidently, raise it up. Good. That's what we're trying to do, okay? And the conversation is not going to be over right now. So as we head into the break, we invite you, especially as we were talking about literature, everything in the library, if you go right into that main foyer as you pass the entrance, there is a Hispanic Heritage Month display of a lot of literature, some of the things we talked about, banned books, some things that are from Nobel Peace Prize literature or Nobel literature winners. So we invite you, as in the break or even after the session, go ahead and head into the library. They are librarians in partnership with them. They worked really hard to go ahead and find some really quality books, so that way you can go ahead and continue the learning even after the session. Okay, so we're gonna come back at 1:30, just like yesterday. I'm gonna plug that pan dulce and I'm gonna plug that cafe, all right? That's out there. Go ahead and get some, meet somebody that you haven't met before. Go ahead and shake hands, learn something, and be back here at 1:30 because the dialogue is gonna continue. So thank you and see you soon.